and welcome to Versus Live. I'm Todd Anderson.
I'm Ross Merriam.
We got Rob over in the booth. If you have any questions for us throughout the broadcast, make sure to add SEG Tour, and Rob's going to be parsing his favorites. But what do we got on the docket for today, Ross?
Well, we've got Mythic Championship number 1 coming up this weekend in Cleveland, Ohio. So we're going to be playing some Standard in preparation for that. And we're several weeks into this Standard season, and things have took pretty good shape with Sultai and Esper and now Mono Blue and Mono White. But this last weekend at Grand Prix Memphis sort of had a new challenger emerge. Rakdos Midrange took on the tournament in the hands of Jody Keith. And we're going to be testing out whether this deck is for real or if Jody is just a secret master. I don't know.
It's not a secret. Man's been winning with Lands and Legacy for as long as I can remember. And, I mean, I know that he's had multiple Grand Prix top 8s in the last couple of years, and he's been a fixture on the SEG Tour for quite some time. So
yeah, so he actually played at the Open in Dallas the week before, made the top 8 of that tournament, played one of the PTQs that happened, or MCQ I should say now.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Right before this Grand Prix, made the finals with the same deck, lost the finals of that. So you're going into the Grand Prix feeling like, oh man, that was my shot. Yeah. Then he just wins the Grand Prix.
Well, it turns out the MCQs, the single eliminations where you got to go 8-0 or 9-0 to win, harder than the Grand Prix. Just gotta say it.
MCQ harder than the Grand Prix.
Anyway, so we're gonna be running through this deck through the Gauntlet. I'm gonna be playing Jody Keith's side of things with his Rakdos Midrange deck. What 3 decks are you playing today against it?
So first up, we're going to have Sultai Midrange. This is Corey Burkhart's list, which was his Jody's finals opponent in the Grand Prix. So we're going to rematch the finals. Jody took it 2-0, but the games are pretty hard fought in this matchup. It's a long grind fest, sort of like the Sultai Mirror. So we're going to be playing quickly to try to get through super long games. And then we've also got on the docket Esper Control and Mono Blue, which are the 3 most popular decks from the Grand Prix. I think will be 3, if not the 3 most popular at the Mythic Championship, but maybe 3 of the top 4 or 5 decks in the format, and a good spread. We've got 1 mid-range deck, 1 control deck, 1 aggressive deck. I think where Rakdos gets its strength is that it actually matches up reasonably against Sultai and Mono Blue, which is tough to do. Where you're going to take your lumps are against Nexus decks. We're not testing that out today, but I really want to see, assuming that the matchup is bad against Nexus because you don't have too much of a clock, got some duresses in the board and war bosses, and you're leaning really heavily on those. I don't think it's enough to turn the matchup around.
I don't either.
So I really want to see if these matchups are solidified, because if they are, Nexus decks are a little bit down right now because of the rise of Mono Blue. So that makes decks like these that previously were held in check by Nexus better positioned.
Oh, absolutely. I think that you hit it on the head. Jody actually made top 8 of the Open in Dallas last weekend and fell to Simic Nexus in the quarterfinals. And I was covering his match. We had it as the backup feature for that round. And ultimately just couldn't punch through enough damage in combat thanks to Root Snare. And then had no real way to disrupt the combo after it started or the engine after it started going. His sideboard, he drew like a Duress and a War Boss, and it was just a little bit too slow,
Yeah. Like a Duress is only going to buy you a turn or 2 in that matchup. They have so much redundancy and so much velocity now. You see Opt being adopted by Simic Nexus. The top 8 list in Memphis had it. And that's another card that just lets them grind through this disruption. So no matter which piece you target, now they're able to use their card selection to find redundant copies of those pieces or backup copies of those pieces. And so we really need to see these matchups shine here for this deck to be a contender for Cleveland, and that's what we're going to test.
It won the Grand Prix. I'm going to start out with saying that. But there are times throughout Magic's history where a deck won a tournament, and then everyone kind of figured out what was actually like the reason why they won. And sometimes it means they didn't play against their bad matchup for a whole weekend, or one of the more popular decks kind of fell off and this kind of took its spot for 1 week or whatever. And we're just going to see if this is something that's going to be a long-time contender or just a flash in the pan.
Yeah, I agree. This first matchup against Sultai, I think, is the big one. They're both mid-range decks. I think without Krasis, you're at a pretty big disadvantage. And you have less of an ability to answer Planeswalkers. Your heavy reds, you're not playing Vraska's Contempt. So Vivian, I think, might be a problem. But you've got good tools yourself. Rekindling Phoenix is super well positioned because these decks are cutting on their own Contempts. Yeah, I think your Direfleet Daredevils are good. You can hit my own Contempt and deal with something big that way.
Right.
Does this deck have Angrath anywhere?
One in the sideboard.
One in the sideboard.
I'm a huge proponent of Angrath. I hoped that the Jody's next iteration of this deck would even have 2, maybe 3 in some in the main deck. I think that it's one of your best answers to Hydroid Krasis, and it's so good against the control and the mid-range decks that it feels like a no-brainer. But Siege Gang Commander obviously kind of gumming up the 5-drop slot, and Siege Gang, if you've watched Jody play the deck at all, is an all-star in the archetype. So
Yeah, definitely a big card. Runs a little bit into finality, but if you can grind through that, then I think you'll be in good shape. And it's almost a good thing to force me to finality early, because then you get to set up your Dire Fleet Daredevil and find. And that's the best target for Daredevil. Get back the cards that I've killed and reload that way. So
yeah, let's take a few questions from Twitch chat, Rob, if we got any on the docket.
Yeah,
what is this Days asking this week?
Yeah.
We'll get to their questions second.
Okay.
So we had one from Ryan Vorland. How do you go about building a deck? Do you start with a build around card and fill a curve to promote it, or what's your what do you start with?
There's no single process. Sometimes there's a specific card that you think is really well positioned, and it changes depending upon where you are in the format. So right now, when we have an established format that's attacking, you want to look for where the holes are, and something that people are missing, and like what people aren't prepared for. But when you're early in the format and you don't have a really big target, sometimes you're looking at specific shells that you want to build around, or a specific card you want to build around. And often what I do is right post rotation, when everything is super fresh, I look at the mana first. Right. What is the mana doing in this format? What can I cast more easily? What colors have better mana than others? Or if I want to build an aggressive deck, what colors have better early mana versus better late mana? I'm always looking at how to exploit the mana engine. What cards can let me jump mana more effectively or get a huge mana advantage? Wilderness Reclamation is the big one in this format, but I'm always looking for ways to break the normal mana engine, because that's how I think Magic operates. That 1 land per turn pace is fundamentally what Magic is, and if you can get ahead or force your opponent to be behind that, that's how you win and lose games. So I'm always looking at mana a lot, but later in the format, when everything's developed, it's really about responding to what's going on.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. What you said about building early in the format, personally, I just wait for VTCLA to 5-0 league, and then I'm like, that's what I'm playing.
But he 5-0s with a different deck every day, so you're just bouncing around like a pinball.
Yeah, just like him. Anyway, so the way that I like to build decks is I do like to start with 1 card, and then I try to push the extremes of it. I started with the Wilderness Reclamation in this current standard format, and I was like, okay, how do we pair it with optimal surroundings? Like Blink of an Eye works really well with it, because at 4 mana you get to play it, interact with your opponent while continuing to cycle through cards. And then you start to look at how do you break it. And you break it with things like Nexus of Fate, Search for Escanta, and Expansion Explosion. And then you have to find the surrounding cast. Like, you got to figure out how many removal spells you want to play, how many things you want to interact with creatures. Do you want to play counter spells? And after that, it's all about finding the right number. But these decks are just insanely hard to build because they're just so unique. We don't really have a model to go off of, because this is not an archetype of Magic that we've had in quite some time. The combo control archetype is not something you see very often.
Yeah, because it's a very powerful archetype and a very difficult one for all the pieces to come together. Yeah. So that's a tough one to build. How Todd explained building, that process is something that's endorsed by a lot of the top deck builders. I know that's often what Sam Black does, where he starts with a core, pushes that core individually as far as it can go, and sort of stress tests it. And then from there can figure out where the holes are and what aspects of the deck he can pair away from in order to make room for some reactive elements.
All right, let's play some Magic. You want to play some Magic?
Let's do it.
Oh, wait, should we do his day's question first, or do you want to save it?
We can go to that one real quick.
Is it a good one, or is it a long one, or a quick one?
I
Just
think it could be kind of quick.
Whether it's long or quick is more dependent on us than the question.
Well, it's more dependent on you.
What do you think of the unclaimed territories in the Gruul midrange deck to top 8 at GP Memphis?
I think they're great. I think you need something like that to make the mana work in that kind of aggressive style deck. I looked through all the different creature types because I wasn't sure exactly what it was naming, but the fact that Zertog Goblin is a Goblin Warrior, and those are the 2 creature types you're naming most often, because Zertog Goblin is the card that stresses your mana the most, is brilliant, and I think it's a really good piece of deck building. Most of the time you see cards like that in heavy tribal decks where you're naming the same tribe every single time, finding a way to turn it into a sort of dual land of sorts.
No, I mean, that's certainly huge. Like, being able to play your Llanowelves in turn 1 with that, if you have a mountain, or just using it as your splash color, Like the deck is green based, right? So
Yeah.
I mean, just using it as a splashed dual land that comes into play untapped is great.
Yeah.
And just giving you one more land that casts Land Rolls off on turn 1. So.
Yeah. I think big aggressive decks like that are the deck that is punished the most for any sort of stumble in the curve,
Yep.
because they're bad at playing from behind and their cards are more expensive than most other aggressive decks, and they are usually light on removal, so you need to be able to curve out as often as possible, and Territory does that in that deck very well.
All right.
Odd or even?
Even. Yeah. I won the die roll.
He figured it out. It just needs to name even. It's even every time.
It is even every time. Because you always named odd and I always went first. And then when I started doing it, I always named odd and you always went first. All right. This hand is not great, but we know the matchup. So I think that this hand is pretty good for the matchup.
And I would say the same thing about my hand.
All right. Blood Crypt, your turn.
Overgrown Tomb, your turn.
Ooh.
What are you about this
what?
early? Treasure map? Little mappy map?
Nah.
I wish there was a sweet card to pitch to Rick's Mighty Reveler in this deck. Some sort of graveyard-oriented card.
Yeah, like a blood gas type thing would be nice.
Yeah.
I don't know what to discard, if anything. I don't even know if I want to play it. All right, whatever. Go.
Okay. Carnival my thing, please.
I don't have a carnival.
Excellent. Trigger.
I mean, I could just shock it.
I'm okay.
Chain Whirler?
Maybe I'm more okay with it getting Carnival because I don't want to get carnaged later on.
Right. That's fair. I don't much care about the body on this creature.
Yeah, it's going to get swept up in a Chain Whirler eventually.
Yeah, I'm just going to say go.
I'm looking to trade this card for anything I can
Right.
before a Chain Whirler comes down. Attack for 2.
18.
Yeah, let's hope this one hits a spell.
Yep.
Cast Down does not really match up that well against most of the threats in this deck. Like the early 2-drop creatures, I don't much care about. It doesn't kill Rekindling Phoenix. And it's like okay, it's against Siege King Commander if you just need to deal with the 2/2 itself. But I think I need to do better. I've got a land drop to make.
Yeah. Sorry. I knew you were going to play land because you showed me the forest, right?
Yeah.
Let's just go and play a Phoenix and hope he doesn't have a Vraska's Contempt. We're not really planning on blocking the Merfolk Branchwalker that's a 3/2. Even if there's a potential bluff there, something like Chupacabra would be too backbreaking here, so we're just going to take the 3 down to 15.
Yep. Take my 3 damage. Pass the turn.
Smush.
16.
Okay, no Contempt, so we're out of the woods as far as that is concerned. We don't have a whole lot going on, so I think what we're just going to do, though, is to get a little more pressure on the battlefield. We're going to play Daredevil Cast Down on this, and it gets exiled. And your turn. That gives us a little more pressure, and doesn't cost us a card, really, because we get a 2/1 body out of it.
That was a good draw.
Yikes. All right,
I'll gain 2. Pass the turn. That was... Whew. My hand was not looking good. I thought this game was going to be real quick.
Attack.
Go back to 16.
Let's play Treasure Map. Play my land. I'm going to Lava Coil your... I'm going to look at the top card first, and then I'm going to decide if I want a Lava Coil or not.
Sure.
It's bottom. All right, I'm going to Lava Coil your thing. Your turn. Ross still has a bajillion cards in hand.
Yep. And we're going to hope one of your cards in hand is not the Eldest Reborn, which I kind of think it is because of how aggressive that Lava Coil was, but I have nothing else going on, so I think I need to just jam.
All right, just play the Phoenix.
Okay.
Your go.
That's a card. So, if I attack with Carnage Tyrant and Todd has a Carnival, then he can double block and trade essentially Daredevil and Carnival for Carnage Tyrant.
What are you talking about? I think he has hexproof.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I could just double block 6 power versus 6 tough.
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't know.
7. I don't know what I'm thinking. I kept thinking that it had
It's okay. Don't
I
worry.
don't know.
It's fine.
I thought it had 7 toughness. For
We
a
mess
second.
up stuff all the time. It's fine.
Yeah. How do I want to play this then? Think I'll just play a 5/5 Crassus and draw 2 cards.
Seems good to me.
Yeah, it seems good to me too. I'll go to 18.
Would you like to attack?
Nope. Those 2 draws were very good.
But this and this, or the 2 cards?
No, the 2 cards I just drew off the Crassus.
Okay. Mm. All right. Transform this treasure map.
Get you some run over turfs. That one went to the bottom.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm fine with an attack here.
14.
Let's go coil shock on the Crisis.
That will exile it from the coil.
Draw 3. Go. And I had to sack a couple treasures there to do it, which I'm not super happy with because they might help longer later in the game.
Attack you for 7.
All right, I'm at 8.
Let's contempt this Phoenix.
Come on.
I go to 16.
Yeah. Yeah, it sucks.
Play a tapped
Okay.
breeding pool and pass the turn.
8 to 16?
Yep.
Okay. All right, draw the card.
Yep. Oh, Siege Gang.
Yep. And I get 3 gobos. And lose to finality. Your turn.
Finality.
Yeah. All right, I'll throw 2 damage at you.
Brings me to 14. And I'll put 2 counters on the Tyrant, so it becomes a 5/4 here.
I'll go to 3.
Attack you to 3. And
Card Sharpen's pretty big game.
pass the turn. I'll just hold some extra cards in my hand in case of a Carnival. Yeah, look.
If you have a creature, I would play it for 2.
Oh,
Just
yeah.
because of Eldest.
Because of Eldest Born. Yeah, I should play the Land Werewolves, but I'll hold this land in my hand. You're right.
That was pretty gross. I mean, that's
Yeah.
kind of the trick that the Sultai decks always do to the mirror matches, right? They build a big battlefield. They play a Carnage Tyrant that forces you to overextend into finality. And we saw right there, like he played a Carnage Tyrant. I was at 8. I have to continue to play things to try to block it. You drew the 2 Rastus Contempts for the 2 Phoenixes, and that was kind of all she wrote.
Yeah, I thought I was pretty far behind in the early game there, but ripping the first Contempt when the Phoenix is pressuring me,
Right.
and I think would have been able to race the Tyrant or like force me to finality much earlier.
I kind of feel like I was burning coils willy-nilly just to get my Rixmati Reveler online and to make a top-decked Eldritch Reborn like that much stronger. But I mean, I never felt like I was really burning them. Like I never had trouble killing things that weren't the Carnage Tyrant, So I don't know. Let's take a couple questions, then we're gonna get sideboards prepared for game 2.
Sure. Toby1 Kenobi was wondering, what happened to Is It Drakes?
Andrew Jessup lost a lot of matches with the deck last week, so now everyone thinks it's bad, and his whole team played it. Ben Friedman, Frank Scarron, Andrew, Danny, a couple other people, like a lot of people played it, and a lot of them did bad. So I don't know if like the current build is not where you want to be. Like maybe you need to have to go back to Phoenix or something. But I mean, when Andrew Jessup doesn't do well with a deck, it's probably not that good.
Yeah, so my article today on StarCGames.com breaks
Nice
down
plug.
all the top standard decks. So there is a section where I mentioned Is It Drakes. I think the deck last season it was the best blue aggressive deck. So there's 2 different flavors of really successful aggressive decks in standard. There's History Benalia and Venerated Loxodon, or there's Spell Pierce Dive Down. And those
That's kind of unfair to Mono Red, but sure.
Mono Red is unplayable garbage.
Boom, boom, boom.
Read my article.
Okay.
Unplayable.
It's unplayable because people are ruining their deck with Skewer the Critics and Light Up the Stage. I think that
I tried a version without those cards. It's not good.
Oh, at the very least, I think you can cut Skewer. I think Skewer the Critics is unplayable.
Yeah.
But I think Live of the Stage is pretty good, and I think the Experimental Frenzy is where you have to still be. And if you choose not to be on Experimental Frenzy, you're not going to win like any games.
Sure. But back onto Izzet. So Spell Pierce Dive Down. In the previous season, Izzet Drakes was the premier Spell Pierce Dive Down aggressive deck.
Yeah.
This season, it's mono blue for a couple reasons. One, Izzet Drakes was better in part because it was significantly more robust. The only big threat in the mono blue deck was Tempest Djinn. Terramander adds an additional, much needed big threat to that deck.
Yeah.
And while it's also quite good in Izzet, and it's seen play in it, it's better in mono blue than it is in Izzet, and more important, it's a more important addition to mono blue.
No,
So that made up a significant portion of the gap. Also, every time a new set is added to standard, the format gets more efficient, and being lower to the ground gets more important. And mono blue has that advantage and more consistent mana. So I think mono blue has just supplanted Izzet as the premier blue aggressive deck in the format, and that means Izzet has this option to go big and be the sort of mid-range deck. We saw that with John Job with his teamer list.
Yeah.
I think that's a sort of a worse deck than Sultai is like a Crisis deck. The one exception though is Niv Mizzet seems pretty good right now.
Yeah.
I think if you just set maybe a turbo Niv Mizzet deck, then maybe there's something there. Because there's not a lot of play crafters around, there's not a lot of chupacabras around. Like the Sultai decks have moved to hostage taker,
Yep.
and if you turbo out the Niv Mizzet and they have to hostage taker it, you have a turn to lava coil and get your Niv Mizzet back. And if you untap with Niv Mizzet, the game's over. That's how that card works. So I think if you want to build an Izzet deck, you need to be building around Niv Mizzet more than anything else.
Sure.
If you're going to be aggressive, you might as well be mono blue.
All right, one more.
All right, yeah, another one from Ryan Vorland. The term shell is often used in deck building. What does that actually mean?
The term shell.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the core components of a deck.
Yeah. Like for example, the core components of the Sultai deck that you're playing today are Wild Growth Walker, Jade Light Ranger, and Fine Finality, I would say.
I would say a Crisis for the Sultai deck. That's your
Sure.
big end game card.
Well, I mean, I don't know. Okay, let's the shell. When
Yeah.
we say the shell, we mean the cards that will show up in like almost ubiquitously across the archetype. And but I mean the shell existed before Crisis. Crisis is kind of the newer addition to the deck.
Yeah, but it is now a core part of the deck. Just because it came later doesn't mean it's any less
fair.
important to the way the deck operates now.
Yeah, when someone's talking about deck building and they say the shell, they mean whenever you're playing Wilderness Reclamation, the shell is Nexus of Fate, Wilderness Reclamation, Search for Gauntlet. That's the shell of the deck, and then everything else is just the moving pieces that you use that kind of come in and come out based on what everyone else is playing. And for the most part, though, that those three cards are in all of
The Explorer creatures are the most important part of the sort of basic Golgari mid-range decks. Those are the creatures that let you put pressure against on control and combo decks, play early defense against aggressive creature decks, but gain some card advantage and flip through your deck and still be relevant later in the game. And that's what mid-range decks want. They want that kind of versatility. So that's the core for this mid-range deck, is this Explore package. And then the mid-range deck also needs some element of going up over the top, and that's what Crisis gives you. Finality is pretty important. So that's borderline part of the core. I think there's an argument to put that one in there too, because it's another key versatile component of the deck.
Yeah.
But the other cards are sort of the window dressing. They're the different disruptive elements. And you've seen we went from Chupacabra being ubiquitous to Hostage Taker.
Splash, and Hostage Taker's been phenomenal from what
Yeah.
I've seen. And so it's all about just developing the players alongside the key components. And whenever we say the shell, we mean the core. And whenever we talk about the utility or anything like that, that's always the players around the core.
Yeah, and we've seen the removal spells shift a lot. They're
cast down sometimes Moment of Craving,
sometimes
Chupacabra,
trophy, sometimes numbers of contempts, and the numbers on all of those things switch around. Oftentimes the reactive elements of a deck aren't part of the core unless you're a hard control deck.
Right.
So Esper, Kaya's Wrath, and Mortify are part of the core because you're a linearly reactive deck.
Right.
So in a control deck, the core elements are going to be your key disruptive elements. The Thought Erasures, the Kaya's Wrath, the Mortify, the Absorb, and then what's your big card advantage engine win condition, and that's Teferi, because those are the key elements of a control deck. So if you distill any given archetype down to the key elements that make up that archetype, and then find the elements of any specific deck that are the core components of that archetype that form those core constituents, then those are going to be the core of that specific list, which are examples of a given archetype.
All right, we're going to take a short break here, about 3 minutes, so we can pay some bills, but we're also just going to be sideboarding, and we're going to come back in a few minutes with that. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. All right, we're back for sideboarding. From my side of things, we're going to be cutting some of our cheaper spot removal. The games go quite long. Even Land Worlds is not something that I'm particularly worried about early in the game, mostly because whatever Ross is kind of ramping into, it's usually some sort of creature. If he ramps into Vivian Reed, that is the only card that I would even remotely deem problematic in the early turns. And if I suspect that, like if he goes elf, I can always use a lava coil or something like that. But I'm on the play here, so also turn 3 Chain Whirler is going to completely dismantle that. And as you can see, Ross is actually cutting his Unworlds. So we're going to be cutting our 5 cheap spot removal spells and just kind of using our creatures as our defensive measure against his explore creature package. We're going to bring in things that help us win a longer game. Angrat the Flame Chain is very strong, great at dealing with Hydroid Krasis, as well as just generating some card advantage by making them discard. It also turns on Theater of Horrors, which is pretty cool. Theater of Horrors is just a way for us to grind extra cards. Status Statue works really well with Goblin Chainwhirler on the give it death touch half, but also in a pinch I can use the statue to kill one of his larger creatures, and then a Fight with Fire, which if the game goes long enough I can just sweep up the whole side of the battlefield.
That one Fight with Fire is nice. I like that. Of note, Status also very good with Siege Gang Commander.
True.
On my side, as Todd noted, I am bringing out my Llanowar Elves. I agree with him. I don't think the early game is of much importance. We're just going to be both sort of setting up our draws, me with Explorer Creatures, Todd with Rixmati Reveler and Treasure Map. So we're going to sort of wait each other out, both get set up, and there's no reason for me to go really fast because I know the games are going to go along. Chain Whirler, really poor top deck later in the game, gets swept up by Chain Whirler, or Llanowar Elves is a poor top deck later, and we're just going to bring in a couple cards that help us grind the long game. Midnight Reaper, an extra Contempt to deal with those pesky Phoenixes, and then Hostage Taker, which is quite good against a lot of Todd's creatures. Right. And you know, even if Todd has to kill it, like it'll stall for a while, and he doesn't have a lot of answers to it. You know.
Yeah, that's true. All right, let's take a couple of questions here while we're shuffling up and getting ready for mulligans.
All right, the Z block in Tetris. What's your opinion on blue-green heavy Sultai lists moving towards a blue-black base for more hostage takers and thought erasers?
I've seen versions that play Thief Sanity, Thought Eraser, Hostage Taker. So it's more of like a core Dimir kind of splashing green. And when you do that, you kind of lose the ability to play the Wild Growth Walkers and the Explore package, which are paramount in your fight against things like white-based aggro and red-based aggro. So if you shift that way, it is completely a metagame decision, and that's fine. If it works, if it helps you beat the the Wilderness Reclamation decks as well as the Esper Control decks, then great. And Wild Growth Walker is traditionally not good in the mirror, so just having a better game one plan against the mirror also seems quite good. So I mean, I like it. I just at that point, then you have to ask yourself, what are you playing green for? You know, why green if you're not going to play the Wild Growth Walker? If it's just Hydro Krasis, then sure, Dimir Splash Krasis seems pretty great.
I think Thief of Sanity is getting a little overrated right now. People are pretty well prepared to answer a 3-mana 2/2 creature. They're not really getting taken by surprise by it at all. And those sorts of decks are really dependent on sticking Thief of Sanity. It's one of their main sources of card advantage because they lose out on the Explore package. They lose out on Vivian Reed. It's not really a comparable Dimir Planeswalker to be playing. Your Fine Finalities aren't as good.
Jace Cutting Castaway. You take it back.
And so you lose out on a lot in order to get Thief of Sanity in your deck. And I understand like people are really high on Thief of Sanity, and they have been for a while. But I think that card is best served in the role that it currently plays as the sideboard juke threat out of creature-like decks.
I agree.
And not particularly good as a build-around threat in the main deck. And so I don't like these sort of Dimir Sultai lists.
I think Thief of Sanity was one of the better cards in Wyatt Darby's Esper midrange deck. And
that is true.
In his deck, he was also presenting his opponent with a choice. On turn 2, you can kill this Hero Precinct 1, or you can try to save that removal spell for the Thief of Sanity. And if their opponent only had one removal spell, they would almost always kill Hero Precinct 1 and then lose a Thief of Sanity. So that was definitely something to keep in mind in that spot.
These Sultai lists do not have a comparable such threat on turn 2. Right. They just have Thought Erasure, which Wyatt also had. Then you really need a lot of things in order to consistently land and untap with your Thief of Sanity. So until you find that sort of threat, then I'm not a fan. If you do, then things change.
How's your hand?
Not good. There's only one land.
throw it back. Let's take another question.
All right.
Draw
Viper
7. I
12
drew 7.
Skies wanted to know, what are your thoughts on the blue-white aggro versus mono-white aggro?
I am not a fan of the splash. So last season, they splashed red and for Banefire and Experimental Frenzy.
Yep.
Those cards are very good splash cards because if they sit dead in your hand for a while because you haven't found a red source and you finally find it later in the game because you only bring them in games that go long, then you're going to cast them and they're going to have a big impact very quickly.
Yep.
Negate and Spell Pierce.
Settle the Wreckage was also a pretty big part of that format too. And so they boarded in 1 mountain, and a lot of times they would get hit with a Settle the Wreckage on 4, and they would go get mountain and 2 more lands, and that would allow them to go Experimental Frenzy and still cast 2 or 3 things.
Very good point. Now, Settle the Wreckage, not a big part of the format. And these blue cards as splash cards, not great splash cards because you need to negate that Settle the Wreckage. You need to negate that Kaya's Wrath or that Teferi, or you're going to fall really far behind. And if you find your blue source 2 turns later after they've drawn 3 cards or wrapped your board, then your negate doesn't do anything. It trades for a spell when they're ahead by 10 cards. So these are very time-sensitive cards, these counter spells, especially in aggressive decks. So they're worse splash cards.
I agree.
And you miss out some percentage points in the aggressive matchups where your mana base isn't as consistent. I will say Deputy of Detention is excellent against both mono blue and white aggressive
I
decks.
agree with that too.
So that, as a splash card, I think is reasonable if you want to hammer home your aggressive matchups. But I don't think it's enough for me to want to be playing another color.
Yeah, I mean, when you're playing, 16 1-drops that all cost white or whatever, it's really difficult to justify playing more dual lands than just Glacial Fortress and Hallowed Fountain. And any land you play that's a dual land after that has to be tapped Guildgate / whatever some fountain or something. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Or it has to be an island. And when you draw the island, when your hand is triple 1-drop or whatever, your draw
Benelish Marshall,
right, and your draw just falls apart. So that splash always has a drawback, and adding another color to your deck will always have a drawback.
I'll put it this way, as one closing remark. White aggressive decks are on my short list to play this weekend in Cleveland. And before we went live, I put in an order at Star City Games. And that order included 12 basic planes because I only had 8 matching ones.
So you're going to play 20 planes, is what you're saying, if you play white.
Actually, included 13 in case I wanted a 21st on my sideboard.
Sure. All right. How's your 6? Or 7? Or double up 7?
This 7 is fine. It was looking bad, and then they ended with a forest, and I really needed a forest. Memorial to Folly, pass.
Okay.
So I would have only needed 4 or 5 planes, but they were sold out of the one I wanted.
Oh, poor baby.
The Odyssey Thundercloud planes.
They make those. Those were in 8th edition as well, I believe. Maybe 9th edition. White bordered. It's a nice one. It's nicer than you think. With that face you're making.
Got to get Ross on camera with those whiteboarded basics.
I don't want to lose my Wild Growth Rocket to a Chain Whirler here, so I'll just take 2.
Yeah, we got him.
18.
We got him. We didn't get him that good, but we got him. Your turn.
I think attacks like that, and I got in some damage last game too because you didn't want. I knew you didn't want to block with your.
I should have. I almost did.
Yeah, just to get me.
Just to drag him.
Let's play a Branch Walker.
All right.
And yeah, we'll leave that J-Light Ranger there. Go to 21. Might get coiled here, but given that I'm about to gain a ton of life or this Walker is going to get coiled, either way, I don't care about blocking this Rixmati Reveler. Yeah. So let's attack for 2.
That's a really good point that you made just then.
18.
You don't have a land.
Oh yeah, I have to play a land.
Do you have another green?
Yeah, but I'd rather just get that in tapped. The reason to play another green is if my J-Light Ranger hits an ETB tapped land, I can play it. But this is already a land I want to ETB tapped. Guess if I hit the second Memorial, that's the Punisher case. But I'll deal with that when it comes.
All right. Bottom 2 spells, which is not great. Ooh, thank you. Is
that a coil?
Thank you. At this point, with Ross at 21, I think we need to just shift roles. So I'm just going to pass turn and maybe just block with Rixmati.
Yeah, attack.
Yep.
I'm perfectly fine just trading off, get my Jade Light down, land, and yeah, we can keep that one there, I think. Pass the
What
turn.
was it on top? Sorry, I missed.
Fine finality.
Sure, that's a good one. All right, here's the thing. I kind of just want to naturally draw a land, but I think I want to treasure map anyway, just to make sure it doesn't get popped by a Vivian. And so if we guarantee a land, we only have to use one treasure here. All right, that's fine. So we get 3 treasures. I'm going to play a land, pop 1 treasure, play Eldest Reborn. Chapter 1. All right, your turn. And it's not the best there, but it's still pretty good.
I'll shock to 19 and Vivian kill the Eldest Reborn.
Yep.
Pass the turn. Not sure how this Vivian dies. There might be a reason to keep in shock, by the way. You have 7 mana. Oh, yeah, you have 7 mana. That's how it dies. One reason
that has to be the play, right? I think
so.
Yeah.
You only need to throw 1 treasure away. You have 6 mana.
3, 4, 5. Oh, right. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You made it seem like I was just kind of following your lead on what you were saying. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
My bad. That didn't actually count. I knew I could do it. I just thought I had to sack everything.
Well, I don't have land 6 for this finality, although I'm not even sure I would want a finality this board anyway. I think we could just cast down the Siege King Commander, play Midnight Reaper, and
It's pretty good.
pass a turn. Maybe I'm supposed to Branch Walker instead of Reaper there.
Shark card.
You got 4 in hand?
Yep.
Yeah, we got ourselves a good old-fashioned...
Grand fist.
There we go. That was the word I was looking for.
Fist. Oh man.
Life total's both still high.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a bunch of lands.
Attack.
Am I about to get... You just bluffing Curly Whirly again. Okay, you got me. 17.
I had you at 21. Did I miss something?
I shocked to play
Okay.
the Vivian.
Sure. All right, we'll play Phoenix and a tapped Blood Crypt. Oh, come on. Was that off the top? Of course.
Maybe. Attack for 3.
15, 19?
Yeah.
Okay. That was pretty good. All right, attack for 2.
17.
Okay. Cheney boy, you're 16.
16.
Your turn. I don't think it's going to get that much better in this spot, and I just want to have a blocker / attacker from midnight.
Go to 14, then back up to 16 and draw 2. And
14 and then back up to 16. I had you from 19 down to 17 and then shocking down to 14 and then gaining 2 back up to...
I took 1 from the Chain Roller to 16.
Oh, I missed the chain roller.
And 14
So you're
back to
14?
Yep,
Okay.
14 back to 16.
Okay.
Pass the turn.
So I actually think that this is a fairly safe attack in a tournament setting, but with Ross knowing how I sideboarded, he just knows I don't have shocks and stuff in my deck. So it's like a pretty bad attack in this scenario because he just gets to eat Chain Whirler. So we'll just play Treasure Map and say go.
Esteas wants to start a petition to only call Chain Whirler Curly Whirly now.
Oh, no. He's one Cheney boy. But Curly Whirly's not bad.
Curly Whirly's slang for a helicopter, though. You know the
I
song?
thought that was Whirlybird. I don't know.
You know the song "Blinded by the Light"?
Yes.
In the lyrics towards the end, when he's talking about a record executive, actually, he says like, "I keep thinking in my head a little Hurly Burly, but that's Hurly Burly Alters. It's slightly different than that."
This is a tangent that is unnecessary.
Came by in her
Can we
Curly
please
Whirly
Can we please play Magic?
and asked me if I needed a ride.
Fair enough. Is it about the Vietnam War?
No. It's an autobiographical song about Springsteen growing up in New Jersey.
So someone
It's
just
not by Manfred Mann, by the way. Manfred Mann was a cover.
Cool.
It's off of Springsteen's first album, Greetings from Asbury Park, New Jersey.
Cool.
This is all just a cover because I have a difficult turn.
That's fair. No, that's fine. If you had said that to begin with, I would have let you talk for days.
Because I don't really want to blow this finality. Todd knows it's here, and this is not a lot of value to get out of it. Like, I kill some stray tokens that don't matter much. This one Chain Whirler, my Midnight Reaper is going to die.
Maybe you draw a card.
The good news is I get my Krasis to 6/6, which is out of coil range, and start putting on Todd under some serious pressure. But if he finds like an Angrath, I would be in rough shape.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty risky play here. And Todd's seeing a lot of cards over the next couple turns. Could also just like find another Siege Gang commander would be really good. But I'm not doing a whole lot else. I can like I can play this Branch Walker and blow this Memorial on a Jade Light and dig myself, which I kind of like. So I think that's going to be my plan. It just gives me a lot more options. So let's Branch Walker and just sort of see what's going on. Well, now I guess I could double Chain Whirler next turn.
Double Chain Whirler.
Or double Jade Light.
Sure.
That seems reasonable. So let's play this tapped and get in our 4.
Sure. 11.
And pass the turn.
All right, I'm gonna treasure map, and I don't know if I want to keep this or not. I guess so.
It's a little early whirling.
All right.
Eldest Reborn. That's pretty good.
It's not bad. It's not great.
Ooh, actually, why don't I just sack this Krasis and get this back and recast it?
Yikes. Okay.
That seems like a good play. Let's draw a card off the Reaper. I go to 15.
Sure.
This takes away some pressure from me, but gives me more like grinding power, which I think is important against the Eldest Reborn. I'm also going to be able to cast this Krasis as a 5/5 next turn, which will also get it out of coil range.
There you go.
So let's pop Memorial, get back Krasis. Draw a fresh one. That's a good one too. Let's play 5/5 and gain 2, go to 17.
Okay.
Pass the turn.
All right. Treasure map. Keep that on top.
It should be map on 3, right? Didn't you treasure map last turn?
No, I'm pretty sure I was at 0 card counters, and then I did one for the Eldest Reborn, and then I drew and played it, and then this is still the same turn cycle.
Yeah, I think it should be on 2. Okay, I'll discard a forest.
I should put this on the bottom. I'm not really changing what I'm doing.
Sure.
What I was thinking about doing is not good. Yeah, how many cards?
5.
All right, let's call the Reaper.
It's pretty good.
I should just let me do this first.
Okay.
Because I can draw a card off this if I want to, and then
3 more Rhino Overturfs.
so top cards is a land. We'll draw a card. Okay, same thing.
Okay.
And your turn.
Jeez. How much do I care about this Eldest Reborn? It's getting back a Siege Gang commander? That seems...
Or Vivian.
Oh, yeah, I can target my... Yeah, that... Okay, I definitely care about you getting a Vivian. So let's play this Vivian. Blow up the Eldest Reborn.
Okay.
Attack you for 5. Bring you to 6.
Yep.
And then play a Wild Growth Walker. And pass the turn.
All right. Sweep your board. Kill Vivian. Hit you for 3.
That's pretty good.
3, 6, 7, 8, 9.
I had exactly 10 toughness era creatures, so
Yep.
I go to 12.
Your turn.
Still feel fine in this game, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, it was good, but it was just literally a band-aid. Now you have a chance to rebuild pretty easily.
Yeah, I had a second Wild Growth Walker. Let's start with a Branch Walker. Gain 3, go to 15. And now we'll play a Jade Light Ranger, gain 6.
21.
Yeah, we'll keep that one too.
Okay.
So, and then play this land tapped. Pass.
All right. Draw a card. Untap. Draw for turn.
Yep.
Draw off the treasure. We'll minus on your Wild Growth Walker and attack you for 4.
Yeah, I'll take 4, go to 17.
Play my land. Your turn.
Now I might be priced into finalitying because it deals with the Angrath. Unless Todd has some sort of removal spell. Which is a little disappointing, though you're down to 2 cards in hand. I'm just worried that one of them is the 2/1 Dire Fleet Daredevil. So as soon as I finality, you'll get to find back some creatures, because I want to use one of these to find.
Right.
And get back this Crassus.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the strength of this deck, is that if Ross just never casts Find Finality, my Dire Fleet Daredevils are not even remotely as powerful as they could be. But
yeah,
it's a really tough spot. I'll say that.
The card to have here is Hostage Taker. Just take the Chain Whirler, clear your board, and kill you. You would literally be dead. I could take a risk and try to explore it into my graveyard and find it back on 8 mana, but that seems unnecessarily greedy. I think with Todd so low on cards, I'm just going to go for it. Let's Finality.
Yep.
So now this becomes a 2/1. We'll attack the Angrath, and then find back definitely the Krasis, and I guess a Jadelight Ranger.
Just going to show you what I got. It's just lands.
Yeah, that's...
Let's hope that I draw a real good one. All right, I am actual dead.
Yeah, I mean, this the Jadelight Ranger itself is lethal, so you had to draw something. So
it's unfortunate. I had a lot of really swingy turns that game. I just feel like I was always down 3 resources because of Krasis. So
you ended with what, like 10 or 12 lands there?
Yeah.
To my 8.
Sure.
I guess I discarded 1. I ended up having 10. One of my lands did something.
Yeah.
So you flooded a little bit more than I did, but not by much. And I'm still up by a lot here at the end, despite multiple.
You're still up by at least 1 Hydroid Krasis, which is the equivalent of 4 or 5 cards in that spot. So no, that was, I mean, I actually, honestly, from my perspective, before we actually sat down to play this match, this is what I thought would happen. I thought that we were just a slightly worse mid-range deck than the Sultai Krasis deck, but our deck was a little more aggressively slanted, so we could put a little more pressure on mono blue and the control decks. Whereas I think the Sultai decks are actually quite weak against the like the Kaya's Wrath Teferi decks, personally. So I don't know. I mean, obviously any deck can win any matchup, but Jody was touting this as a good matchup and said he went 10-0 across 4 events or 3 events.
I don't know if it was 10-0, but he remarked that he had beaten it 10 times. Like there was a little Twitter interview he did, and he rattled off the number of times he beat it. I don't know if he lost the matchup in that span, but he was beating it a lot. He won this matchup 2-0 in the finals.
Sure.
I think the big thing that happened just in these 2 games, as far as small sample size goes, is I had contempt for Phoenix every time.
Yeah.
I took 1 hit from it. I top decked it I thought I was going to lose that game. Then ripped contempt. You played it there in game 2 pretty early, and I ripped contempt immediately. And I had a contempt later for 1, and I drew both of them in game 1 that were in my deck. So you drew 3 Phoenixes out of your 8, and I drew 3 contempts out of my 5. Sure. And that's key. I think Phoenix is really big in this matchup. It's the card that lets you apply pressure and will often force me to use my resources awkwardly if I don't have exactly contempt. Yeah. But I just happen to have contempt every time.
So one thing that I want to point out is that I actually, in the games as they played out, Ross is basically never holding a land. So it's possible that Carnage, being able to get the last 2 cards out of his hand in a spot where he's like, trade, Hydroid Krasis. So Carnage / Carnival might actually have a slightly bigger impact than I thought. So that's something to consider. But, I mean, as far as everything else is concerned, you're just trying to match a Hydroid Krasis deck in a mid-range fight. And to me, that just feels foolish.
Agreed. You're playing a long game. Eventually, you're going to have 8 or 10 lands in play and draw one of these. And there's very little you can do to effectively trade with it. You just have to do something bigger and more powerful. And you have cards that help you keep up on raw card advantage. You have treasure maps. You have some advantage from Siege Gang Commander. You have your own Dire Fleet Daredevils on Find. You never got to do that.
Yeah.
I thought that's what was going to happen on that last turn.
Yeah, and if I have that, the game ends up going for like another 5 or 10 turns.
Yeah.
Because I get to get back, Siege Gang Commander plus something else, and maybe even like I don't think I had a Dead Rekindling Phoenix, but I get back a lot of stuff. Rick's Body Reveler, which lets me translate the any point of damage into 3 more cards. I had plenty of mana to be able to cast everything. So Yeah, I mean, if I had drawn Darfleet Daredevil in that last spot, that would have been quite good. But at the same time, I always felt like I was fighting from behind, and I'm not really sure how to combat that because your deck applies a lot of pressure while also gaining card advantage and gaining life. So I can't really go over the top of you, but also can't go under you. And I think
Yeah.
that is really the downfall of this matchup. And honestly, I'm gonna have to talk to Jody and figure it out from the man himself.
Yeah, I agree. You saw me most of the time just ignoring your 2 and 3 mana creatures,
Right.
your Revelers, even your Chain Whirlers, the extra tokens off Siege Gang. They just sat on the battlefield, not doing a lot, while I held back with a Wild Growth Walker or some 3/2s, what have you. And you're not really putting me under a lot of pressure. I'm at 20 life most of the game. And if that's the case, if neither player can really get aggressive, you're in for the hard attrition match. And that's when you don't want to be playing against Graces because it comes off eventually. And, I've got fine to get it back. You ended up killing one with an not with an Angrath, but killed one with something, and I just brought it back with a
I killed a
Memorial.
Wild Growth with Angrath, and I killed a Krasis with
It was a 4/4, but you didn't coil it.
no, I don't remember. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter. I know that it wasn't supposed to get exiled.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So I just keep bringing it back, cast Krasis 2-3 times every game.
here's the thing. This version, I actually wrote about in my article last week. If you want to check it out, one of the decks that I compared to Jody's because Jody top 8 the Open last week in Dallas, and I thought that the old school version that we had tested before the first Open of the season that featured more copies of Status Statue to go along with Chain Whirler was one of the key reasons why we were having any success against the Sultai midrange decks. And I think Status Statue is just a phenomenal card for the deck because of how versatile it is.
Helps you out in the reclamation matchups.
Right. Being able to destroy enchantments is key, but also just giving you that 1-2 punch in some matchups where your opponent just puts up such a huge battlefield. And I also think the potential for Skargan Hellkite is there because it dodges finality when you put a counter on it. And since you're playing so many green, red, and black, red dual lands, you actually get to play your own fine finality, which lets you play this super long game.
No, I completely agree. Jim Davis played that deck at the week 1 Open, and I watched him multiple games where those stalls on the ground happen. He's got a Chain Whirler or maybe some other stuff going on, and his opponent's got some Explore creatures and whatnot on the battlefield, and he eventually just sets up the combo, Chain Whirler plus Status, and Plague wins his opponent and immediately has so much pressure
Right.
that it's impossible for his opponent to catch up. And he was playing Skargan Hellkite over Siege Gang Commander, and you can debate that, but one of the good things about that is when you make that combo happen and you get that far ahead, the response from the Sultai player is going to be finality your board.
Right.
And now you have a 5/5. It's going to stay around. It's going to deal at least 7 because you have mana to sink into it, probably 9. And that's probably lethal after the first big swing you made.
I mean, so my thing with Siege Gang Commander is that whenever I have cast it in play testing this deck, Jody's version specifically, is that my opponent almost always kills it, right? And sometimes I get to shock something, whatever. But I have yet to really untap with a meaningful Siege Gang Commander. And I think that the fact that like you don't present anything early on that is really worth killing is kind of a big deal. And then once you get to the spot where you actually cast Siege Gang Commander, the goblins aren't that relevant because you've just kind of each of you are just building up creatures on either side of the battlefield, and but I think one of the easiest way to make those early creatures relevant is having one-sided board clears like the Plague wins, and without it, I don't think that maybe Siege Gang Commander is better in the version that does play Status Statue. Like I haven't really tested that much out, but like you said, one of their easiest ways to get back once you've played one of them is to wrath you back with the finality. So
yeah, I completely agree on the tokens not being that relevant. Normally you think of a card like Siege Gang Commander as being resilient to spot removal.
Right.
They kill the 2/2, you still have 3 1/1s around, you can do something with them. In this matchup, you can't really. They just sat there doing nothing. They got a little damage in, but that's not that relevant.
yeah.
And eventually they just get swept up by something, whether I hostage take or a Chain Whirler or a finality whenever I feel like it. There's never any pressure on me to have to use my cards. I found that finality super early in the game, and I waited as long as possible to have to cast it. Eventually I did.
And for me, that just feels like it's a battle that I can't win.
Yeah,
if
because
you
I'm in
always
control.
You have complete control, and no matter what I do, if I overextend, I'm going to get swept. If I just trade, you're just going to gain a bunch of extra cards off of it. And then, like we saw, I didn't draw Direfleet Daredevil. I was never able to punish you once you were, in the business of casting it. So anyway, we're gonna take a few questions, then we're gonna take a break. First
Sure.
up, Rob, what we got?
Dak Lean wants to know what does grinding to mythic with a single deck on arena mean to you compared to say like an arena 5.0 list, or I mean a Magic Online 5.0 list?
I don't think either is particularly indicative of the strength of the deck. I know that there are plenty of decks that go 5.0 on Magic Online that I try them out and I find 10 things wrong with them immediately. And it's possible that, some of the things are just me making small mistakes, but I always catch the small mistakes as I'm making them. I'm like, oh, I could have done this. I could have done that. So there's always like the learning curve. The people who 5.0 with their decks pretty regularly just have hundreds of hours with their deck or whatever. As far as the Mythic ranking is concerned, I'll take Alex Haynes' word that Mono Blue is the best deck when he's number 1 Mythic ranked. If someone says that they hit Mythic, they're like number 237 or whatever, and they're just playing a deck that has not put up any results in a live tournament, I am skeptical. So I think that it carries some weight to hit Mythic. I'll give you that. But I'll say this. Most people swap decks constantly when on their grind to Mythic. They usually play something like Mono Red or whatever to get to Platinum, and then from Platinum Diamond to Mythic, they just kind of metagame based on what they're playing against. And so if they say, in the last 12 matches I played this and they went 12-1, well, they could just have like a perfect metagame for that one deck in that one spot, but that's not indicative of the overall metagame.
Yeah, and it takes a lot for me to put any stock in a deck solely based on its results. I mean, we're taking this deck that just won a Grand Prix of a 1,500 to 2,000 person tournament, probably. I don't know exactly.
There's no coverage. I have no idea.
Yeah. So a huge tournament, a known player, a player who has a lot of results both at Grand Prix and on the on the SCG tour. So there's some pedigree there, and I'm still skeptical of the deck.
Same.
But a deck that goes 5.0 on Magic Online that I look at and say this deck does everything I want to be doing in the format, I'm in on that deck immediately. I look at the deck itself and I try to evaluate the deck on its own merits, rather than just take the results as the sole guide. But the results just sort of tell you where to look. Like I'm not looking at decks that are going 2-3 all the time. I'm looking at the 5.0 decks, but within those 5.0 decks, once I see one that it went 5.0 isn't automatically like a check mark. It's what is this deck doing? And to me, this deck is saying like, it's going to beat up on the aggressive decks. I'm sure this deck is great against white aggro. It should be good against blue aggro, I hope, with all the cheap removal and Chain Whirler and Rekindling
Phoenix. And it might actually even be pretty good against Esper Control, too.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I just think that, like, your grind plan against the other mid-range decks is strong. Yeah. It's just not Hydroid Crisis strong.
Exactly. And Jody was beating that matchup, so maybe we're doing something wrong. I'm still like, I could believe that this is wrong, but for now, I'm skeptical that this matchup is good. And it's hard for me to say I'm going to take a deck that is pretty good against the aggressive decks and good against the control decks, but bad against Nexus and Sultai. Is that a good place to be for this weekend's tournament? I don't know. But if I come to that conclusion that that's what the deck is, and the metagame turns to a point where that makes the deck well positioned, then yeah, I'm in on that deck.
So I'll say this: for me, it's I am never all in on a deck when it has one result. I am usually in on a deck when it has two. The first weekend of the standard format, we had Max Magnuson make top 4 with the white base aggressive deck Splashing Blue for Deputy Detention. But on top of that, Eric Hawkins also top 4'd the Classic, I think, or maybe top 8'd the Classic the same weekend. And then after that, Hawkins also went on to top 8 in Dallas too. So like,
I won the Team Open,
right? And so it's where there's smoke, there's fire, that kind of thing. And when but with like Jody, he also has put up 2 good results with his deck, 3 if you count the PTQ finals. So I'm starting to think this deck is a real contender, and this might just not be a great matchup, or I'm just approaching it from a completely wrong angle.
Yeah, there's some work, I think, to understand this matchup. These mid-range mirrors are really complicated because they go really long. You need to know exactly which resources you need because you're going to see 30, 40 cards out of your deck. So you're going to see a huge portion of it, and you're going to see those different singletons or 2-ofs that you have. And so you need to be configured really, really well.
Yeah, one thing I want to point out in that last game that we just played, I cast a Nellis Reborn kind of willy-nilly, took out like a Branch Walker or whatever, There's a chance in that specific spot, because Ross ended up just playing a Vivian Reed and minusing. What I'm supposed to do is hold that Eldritch Reborn for as long as possible, deploy like a Siege Gang commander, force Ross to play Finality, and then I get to snag Vivian Reed with the Eldritch Reborn, and then and also like just puts myself in a spot where he doesn't have the answer anymore for that Eldritch Reborn. So, you can't just play your spells as you draw them, and I kind of felt like that's what I was doing. I was just like, oh, I drew a thing, kill a thing, drew a thing, kill a thing. But you have to figure out the combo spots where you put your opponent in a position to get to leverage the full value out of all of your cards. And in a matchup that goes 10, 20 turns, if you're not leveraging every card, there's a chance that you lose by 1 or 2 cards at the end of the game.
Yeah, and you saw me, I had multiple spots to use Finality or Find early for small amounts of value, and I just didn't. Yeah. I just used my other things. So maybe like you weren't putting appropriate weight on one of your big cards, the Eldritch Reborn, whereas I was with Find Finality, and that was a big difference in just these games we played. Mm-hmm. And if you do it differently, the deck shows up and becomes more impressive. Also, we talked about the potential for Carnage to be better because I'm playing out my lands because of Crisis. Though if I have extra lands in my hand and I play around Carnage, maybe it's not as good. But you can still, I think tagging the early Explore creatures might be really good in this matchup because then your 2/2s and stuff start getting in.
Yeah, and I could just be sideboarding completely wrong. Like if Jody is like, well, Lava Coil actually comes out or something, like some weird thing that I just wouldn't even think about.
Yeah.
Because Shock clears off the little things and then you get some damage in. I don't think I would side a Lava Coil ever, but just something like that. There's probably something that he does differently. So I'm just I'll pick his brain a little bit. And we'll come back with more stuff about it. But yeah, we need to progress.
Well, this is far from a decisive match. There's a lot of going on, a lot you can learn about the matchup. So I mean, we're both still skeptical that this is a good matchup, as Jody has been touting it to be, and but there's potential here. Like the deck does powerful things. You can definitely grind with the Sultai deck. It's just a question of if you can grind over them.
Yeah. All right. One more question, then we're going to take a short break.
All right. What are your Jay Bear wants to know, what are your thoughts on Demystify in the white aggro decks?
Perfect. It's white Spell Pierce. I don't know. It's every deck has some enchantment that's really good. I think that being 1 mana is a huge deal, and it gives you that very cheap way to interact with Wilderness Reclamation in spots where you will just lose to the card.
There were some Onslaught Demystifies in my order today as well.
Nice. All right, one more. That was a short one. Demystify is great.
Blue Tempo Mage wants to know, Todd, what's your order at Waffle House?
My order at Waffle House. It varies. Today I got the hash brown bowl with sausage, bacon, and well done grilled onions. Yesterday I got just a scrambled eggs cheese plate with bacon hash. Yesterday I did grits. It varies. I always get breakfast. Or not always. I get burgers sometimes. Okay.
That's all we got.
I guess we'll cut it there.
2 to 3 eggs over medium, hash browns scattered and smothered, wheat toast.
Yeah. Anyway, we're going to take a short break here while we prepare for the second match. Thanks for watching First Live. We'll be right back. See you soon.